What's up, YouTube? Welcome to the Counting Wisdom podcast. I wanted to talk about a story that I think is kind of crazy, and just as a little bit of a disclaimer, I think some could possibly consider it a little bit explicit, depending on how you look at it. But I saw that in the news, it was on, I think, a okay news station, because obviously, there is fake news out there. Not everything that we see on the internet is actually true. But, I saw how two whales and, the whole LGBTQ movement and the world's position on that, it was saying that how two males basically were mating, and they're considering it to be the first time ever to have two whales who are of the same sex actually, mating. And so obviously, I think, the scientific slash unbelieving community is going to use that as fuel to say, oh, you see, it's natural, or, hey, you can find this type of thing in nature. And so I think that's kind of interesting, but also I think it is sort of a sign of the last days. I think the Bible gives some indication, and actually I think I can think of a few sources in the Bible where not only do people sin, but animals sin in some ways. I don't think it's necessarily in the same mindset as people, but again, the Bible doesn't tell us a lot about how animals think, other than the two examples that I have sort of give some indication that animals do sometimes have the capacity to think like people, even though they aren't. And I do sort of believe that animals in heaven are going to be much different than what they are now. And I think possibly talking animals are possibly going to be, in heaven as well. But anyway, the first example I think is obviously the talking snake in the Garden of Eden. I think that's our first example of some form of animal sinning in some way. Now, obviously, there are some common beliefs amongst the Christian community that snake was basically an angel who took the form of a snake. Satan, who took the form of a snake. And so most people in the Christian community do believe that angels can sometimes take a different form, or what we like to call they're able to possess a animal, or I guess in some cases people. But the Bible doesn't explain a whole lot about that, of course. When Jesus starts talking about, demons possessing people, it's kind of interesting that, you don't necessarily see any stories like that in the Old Testament. Now, obviously, when we sort of read the New Testament, it seems sort of normal to us in a way, like, oh, we can sort of understand it. Especially, different things that we may talk about growing up, and then we actually read the Bible, and so we can sort of understand it, and it doesn't seem weird to us, I guess, in some way. But, when you look at the Old Testament, it doesn't necessarily talk about demons, I know Moses sort of mentions that, but anyway, that's the one example that I think gives some indication that animals do sin in some way. Now, I think obviously when we look at the animal kingdom, you can see that another animal killing another animal, even though it's not necessarily the same type of thing that we would sort of think of it as, especially, the scientific community or something wouldn't necessarily call it a sin, but we know that, killing another life form, is sin. There's a difference between, cutting down a tree versus, killing a cow or killing a animal in some way. I do believe that the Bible does classify, sin as how a person kills an animal. I do believe are a few examples of how that if you kill an animal, for a reason other than maybe using it for food, or maybe something other than, I don't know, hunting, in some form or fashion, but hunting is usually connected with food consumption, that if you kill an animal for another reason other than that, then it is considered sin. And I think the Bible does give some examples of that. And obviously, there are animals who were killed as a sacrifice. In Judaism, you have animals being killed for sacrifice, but for killing an animal out of anger, I think is connected to some form of sin. And so I would say that you could sort of say that when a lion kills a another animal, maybe an antelope, something like that, I would say you could sort of stretch it in saying it is some form of sin, but I don't think it's full on a sin, I guess, in the same way where you would sort of like, I don't know, hold the lion up to judgment or something, and put him in hell or something because he killed an antelope. I don't think it's to that extent. But the other example that I wanted to give that I think gives an indication that animals can sin in some way, or at least in some form or fashion held accountable, or in some form or fashion represent something that's going on amongst people, and that is the story of Jonah. So not the whale part, but the Jonah part, where even it shows in the story of Jonah that the Ninevites, the people of Nineveh, repented, but it also shows the people using the animals in some way to show repentance. When the story talks about even the animals were given sackcloth to wear, I think in some form or fashion, I don't think the Bible fully explains it, but in some way there is a connection between sin and what goes on with animals. Now, obviously, I guess the people of Nineveh could have just hey, we're going to put sackcloth on our animals too, because I don't know, maybe they sort of did something wrong in regards to the animals, or I don't know. But I think that is another example in the Bible of showing some connection to sin with animals. And so I think, all that being said, a proof of the end times is that when animals are doing something that is not normal for an animal, and of course this is especially documented, especially when you see documentaries of whales, and normally out of at least all the time that we have sort of been able to view whales and record whales, that you've never seen something irregular. It's usually a normal kind of mating process. I think that a proof of sin being spread, lawlessness abounding, is that when it spreads to the earth and the animals, I think obviously, the Bible gives some indication of how there's a connection between the earth doing irregular things. Jesus talked about famines. We know disease can come from the earth in some form. And then obviously Jesus talked about earthquakes in various places. And so clearly, even though it's really people, and people are kind of the main focus of the Bible story, of course, but there seems to be a connection to the earth and the animals in Scripture. I think a few examples that I can give are the earth. God talked about the earth swallowing people up, so to speak. In the book of, I think, Deuteronomy, Moses talked about how the earth will basically fight against people in some way. And one of the references that I can remember is the earth swallowing people up. And we actually are given one example of how the earth opens up to swallow a rebellious person in the camp when Moses was leading the children of Israel. There was a man that rose up against Moses and was basically trying to be in charge and take Moses out of his leadership position. And so it said that the earth opened up and swallowed him and his family. And most of us assume that he was taken alive into hell, I guess. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say that. But, there is, I think, one example of how, the earth can, operate in a way that is, beyond what we would normally think the earth does. Now, obviously, I think God, can cause the earth to do that. One question is the earth acting autonomously, versus, God maybe telling the earth to, open up to swallow this person, because they're so sinful. But either way, we have that story. And then another example that I thought of, which is not necessarily a sin example, but the last example that I want to give before I go on to other examples are the donkey. The donkey in the Old Testament who spoke to Balaam, and basically it said God opened the donkey's mouth to speak. Now, I don't know if that is an example of the angel sort of possessing the donkey in order to speak, because I don't know if possession is used in a way to, I had kind of a thought about angels and what they do, both the good and the bad angels, because when you look at the story of Zechariah, I think it's Gabriel who was speaking to Zechariah. He caused Zechariah's mouth to be mute. And then we also see that same thing happening in regards to a negative situation, which we assume comes from more of a demonic, which most of us assume when the Bible references demons, it's talking about fallen angels. And we see different stories in the Bible of someone becoming mute in a negative way, that Jesus, releases them from their demonic oppression, and so they are mute. And so I don't know, you kind of see angels using it, but just in a different way. One person is mute from some sort of oppression, some sort of demonic kind of thing. But then you see Zechariah, who who is struck mute because more of a disciplinary, not necessarily a completely sinful thing or sinful reason. So I don't know. That's interesting. But anyway, Balaam was talked to by a donkey, and the donkey starts talking to him, and there's that story about a donkey. And so I do think animals do kind of represent different things in the world, depending on the situation. And so I wanted to talk about the next sort of thing that I don't know if I can really find anything in the Bible, but I think it's sort of interesting that we have discovered new species. I saw this video, but it was kind of old. I think it was like a year old or 6 months old or something. But there was this, it would look like a sort of like an octopus, but it was like something that has never been seen before. And it made me kind of wonder, like, is God still creating things? Or is it just we have never been to that area where this animal lives? And so it really makes you wonder. But also, when I actually saw what the animal looked like, I think it gave some indication of some sort of warning in some way about the times that we are living in. I don't know. I think this is a stretch, but the way that that animal looked, it wasn't, like an octopus. It looked more vicious or fierce in its features. And so I think that was, in my opinion, some indication of the signs of the times. But, I don't think there's really any biblical connection. But, that's all I want to say about that. But then, let's see, the last thing on this podcast, I think this was all, centering on animals. I thought another proof of sort of the last days, which I don't know if it's really that convincing as, on the list of if we were to rank all the things that could convince someone of the last days. I don't know if it's really high on the list, but it was the crab that have disappeared in parts of the ocean. I think that is one of the signs of the last days in some way. Again, I don't know if it's a really strong sign, but it's kind of weird that, I think that, maybe the fishermen have, gotten all the crab out, and they just didn't realize how much they were fishing, and, they didn't realize how much they were taking out of the ocean. And so eventually they took almost everything out, and, now it's disappeared. But another thing is, I know the news stations are sort of talking about it, not from the standpoint of, I don't know, human error, but they're kind of talking about it from such a point of like, oh, wow, the crab have just disappeared, and we don't know what happened to them. And so I just thought that might be worth sharing as far as, another sign of the time of, just the depletion of resources. I think is sort of a sign of the last days when you think about it. If we are sort of running out of some resources that, can sustain life, then, that could be a sign of, kind of a natural sign of, hey, we need to transition to a, time where Jesus reigns and, acts upon the earth. And so, anyway, thanks so much for checking out this podcast. I thought that I think the most convincing one is the whale story that I saw. And so, you can check that out. But I think that, overall, when we see animals doing, I think especially irregular things, I think it can definitely be some sort of sign of the last days. And I think when God, describes like the story of Noah, one indication could be of why he destroyed all of the animals. Could be connected to some form of sin that something that the animals were doing that wasn't right. Um, but also, I don't know if God could have fit all the animals into an ark. So it's kind of like one of those things where he had to choose, just a pair from each class of animals. But also, maybe there was some sort of wrong thing that the animals were doing in some way. So anyway, look up that story if you're interested. I posted a picture that they posted on the news source. I think it was ABC News. And so hopefully I'm going to put that in the thumbnail that you can see. Thanks so much. Hopefully this was helpful and interesting to someone, and I will talk to you on the next one. See ya.